I'm going to show you how to make a chocolate and hazelnut tart. It's a no-bake tart, so it's really easy to make, but you get a really lovely result at the end. So let me start by telling you the ingredients. So for the base, we've got a lovely nutty base with hazelnuts and also walnuts. We're also going to add some dates, some cocoa powder and some maple syrup as well. Now for the center, we're going to use a lovely dark chocolate, really rich and delicious, and lots of health benefits as well, would you believe? We're also going to use a hazelnut nut butter and some silken tofu, which again is a little bit different but works really well. It's nice and creamy. We're also going to add to this a lovely raspberry crudité. We're going to use fresh raspberries, we're going to use some lemon juice, some sugar, and we're also going to use some corn flour as well to thicken it up a bit. So we're going to start by the base. You're going to need a food processor for this, because I think you can do it by hand, but I think for best results, if you've got a food processor, please do use it. So I'm going to put the nuts in, a little bit noisy, so excuse that. So again, packed with goodness and energy and flavour. Also going to add in my dates. And I'm going to add in my cocoa powder and my maple syrup. And we're going to give that a good blitz because we want a nice sticky paste. Now, because there's a lot of ingredients in there, it might take a little while. Depending on what machine you have is going to depend on what kind of consistency you get, but we see how we get. Now, if you find that yours is a bit dry, you can always add a little bit of water or a bit more maple syrup, which I might do in a minute. So let's check on it. Well, actually, it's looking pretty good, so I'm just going to finish off. Now, what I looked for there is consistency and texture, and I'll show you what I mean once I've done it. So I might scrape down the sides and give it a little mix. Whatever machine I'm using, from the most expensive to the cheaper end of the scale, I always scrape down the sides, so don't worry about that. It's good to check on your mixture, because what you'll do when you eventually, if you're a beginner, you'll start to notice texture, you'll start to notice what you're looking for. And what we're looking for here is it to come together so it binds together, because it's going to be our base. If it's too wet, all you need to do is add a little bit more cocoa powder or maybe some more nuts to the mixture. So this is exactly what I'm looking for. It's sticky and it clumps together. So I'm going to carefully take out my blade. Always be super careful because they're very sharp. Put that to one side. And then you're going to get messy with your hands. So you probably want to take off your rings for this one if you're wearing any jewellery. And all I'm going to do, I'm going to get my tray. So let me quickly tell you about my tray. I've got I'd say a tart tin, more like a quiche Lorraine tin if you're familiar with that fluted edge, but it's also got a loose bottom. Now for extra security, I've got a little bit of parchment paper as well. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to use a tiny bit of the mixture because it's really sticky. And I'm just going to put it on the bottom. And that's going to act as a little bit of glue so my parchment paper isn't moving around too much, because we're going to be pressing it down into the sides. So in it goes. Now this mixture actually makes a really gorgeous, what I call a raw truffle. So you can roll them into balls, coat them in cocoa powder, and they're a delicious little nutty energy bite. If you've got leftover mixture, which I have, it's absolutely fine, because I may need to add a little bit more in, I may need to take some out, but what you can do with the leftover mixture is roll it into truffle-sized balls, coat it in cocoa powder, and they're beautiful little energy bites. Really good. Okay, so now we're going to get super messy by squishing it all down. So you want to coat, first of all, start by squishing it into the whole of the tart tin. So it takes a little while. Now the good thing about this is if you don't like hazelnuts, you can use a different nut. It's absolutely fine. You could use a Brazil nut, you could use cashew nuts, you can use a mixture of different nuts. It's entirely up to you. So I'm going to get that right into the edges. And we want the fluted shape as well. So as well as making a huge tart like this one to feed a lot of people, you can make them in little tart tins, and that makes it a little bit more elegant, a little more pretty. You can also take it on a barbecue, or you can, if you're having a garden party, it's nice for the summer because it's served cold. And I think it's obviously in winter, I like to have like a warming dessert. So this, I see this personally as a more of a summer dessert. So I'm getting that right into the edges. So I'm going to put this in the freezer, but if you haven't got a freezer or you want to keep it overnight, the fridge is absolutely fine. This is a fun one to make with children as well because they love getting messy. They love chocolate. Who doesn't love chocolate? Okay, we are nearly there. So this takes a little bit of time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively quick, you know, quick and easy. So when you put it in the fridge or the freezer, all you're looking to do is to firm it up a bit. It's pretty firm already. Mine's a little bit stickier than I probably would have liked, but we'll be fine, we'll get away with it. But the reason I put it in to chill down is because it just really firms it up. This is never going to be like super solid. It's always going to be a soft base. It's not going to be like crunchy hard. But you still want it to hold together as much as possible. And there we go. Just wipe my hands and then I'm going to put that in the freezer. And after that, we're going to move on to the center. Whilst the base is chilling in the fridge, I'm going to start with the center. So first of all, I'm going to melt some chocolate. So for the chocolate, I've got a 70% chocolate. So that's like the perfect combination between bitter and sweet. If you like things a little bit sweeter, you can always add some maple syrup to this, like a tablespoon. I wouldn't go more than a tablespoon. However, because the base is quite sweet, I don't think you need to add any more sweetness to it, but that's just my personal opinion. So you can play around with it. What I like to say with recipes is once you've made them a couple of times, you've kind of mastered it, you're more than welcome to add in your own thing, like swap something out. I'm not talking about baking because that's more of a science, but this type of cooking where it's a bit more forgiving, then you can experiment, which I think is the fun part of cooking, where you think, oh, well, I'm going to add this and this, and you get your confidence and you're like, oh, I'm going to try this and this. And then a few months down the line, it's your recipe. It's not even my recipe anymore because you've changed it, you've adapted it to suit you and your family or your friends. So this is melting down nicely. Just to recap with chocolate, when you're melting it directly on a hob, an induction hob's perfect for melting. I have gas at home and I still melt chocolate on. What I would say is have it on the lowest heat, because if you think chocolate melts at body temperature, you really don't need to have any kind of power. And keep stirring it so it doesn't catch. Also, what happens is when chocolate little buttons start to melt, they do tend to clump together, and you can end up with one big lump in the middle, which takes longer to melt down. So just give it a little stir, turning it over so the hot chocolate at the bottom comes to the top and helps melt all of it. So as I was saying, in this, it's a little bit unusual because we are using tofu. And some people love tofu and are confident with it. Some people don't like it and don't know what to do with it, basically. So silken tofu or soft tofu, like a smooth, soft tofu, is perfect for sauces, mousses, and also fillings because it emulates, say, a soft cream cheese, that kind of type of consistency, and it goes smooth and silky. Now, talking of smooth and silky, we're actually going to add a nut butter, so we're adding texture into it. So we're using a hazelnut butter, which I've found isn't as easy to get as your normal nut butters. So you can swap that out for a peanut butter, nut butter, almond butter, whatever you've got in your local shops. Or you can obviously order online as well. Hazelnut butter I find is a little bit decadent and it's got a lovely taste to it. But again, whatever your preference is still going to work because we're only using like a tablespoon or so. inside. Okay, this is nearly done. So I have my tofu, which is quite cold, but I've taken it out. So it's been like this for a good half an hour. It's still got a chill to it, because what we don't want to do is have it really, really cold, because what will happen is it will seize up the chocolate immediately, and then it will be, it might go a bit lumpy, which we don't want. It's not the end of the world though, because even if that happens, because we're adding a nut butter to it with texture, you can kind of get away with it. So we've got a lovely melted chocolate, which I could just dive into. So let's move our hob out of the way, and we're going to move in our Food Pro. So I'm going to put my tofu in. In it goes. I'm going to add in my nut butter. So I haven't gone for a smooth nut butter, so that will be reflected obviously in the final dish. But I kind of like to have some texture. And then I'm going to add in my melted chocolate. And as quickly as we can, working with urgency but not panic, we're going to blitz that up. We'll get all that in. Let's check on it. Yep, and lastly, I'm just going to scrape down the sides, and then we are good to go. Chocolate is a messy business. Let's have a look now. Ah, perfect, if I do say so myself. So as you can see, we've got that lovely kind of mousse-like texture, but obviously we've got a bit of nut butter in there as well, but that's the kind of consistency we're looking for, dropping consistency. So all I need to do now is get the tart case from the freezer. And then we're going to carefully put that in. And this on its own makes a really lovely chocolate mousse. And then I'm just kind of really informally smooshing it on. So for decoration, I'm going to use some hazelnuts and some fresh raspberries. With the hazelnuts, because they're whole, I'm going to just crush them down a bit with a rolling pin. You can, of course, do this in a food processor as well, but I'm just going to almost just get a little bit of hazelnut crumb. I think it looks prettier, and it's also a bit easier to eat as well. Tend to go everywhere though. Weeks later, you'll be finding bits of hazelnut. So I'm only going to do one side. Or I might go all the way around, why not? So just scatter it around, and you can press them down a little bit. All the way around. And if you prefer a crumb rather than the big crunch, that's absolutely fine as well. That looks really pretty. But I like to have a crumb, sorry, a crunch. And then just for a bit of colour, I'm going to add in some raspberries around the edges. Again, you do not have to do this. This is just me loving colour and fresh, you know, bringing some freshness to it. Okay, back in the freezer it goes, and I'm going to show you how to make a lovely raspberry coulis to go with it. For a lovely bit of decoration, not just for the chocolate tart, but just in general, a really quick, fresh raspberry coulis works every time, perfect on ice cream. You only need a few ingredients. You've got some lemon, fresh raspberries, a little bit of caster sugar, or you can use icing sugar as well, and I've got some corn flour just to thicken it up a bit. So I'm going to put my heat on and start heating up my raspberries. And what happens is the heat actually sweetens the raspberries as well. You can use frozen raspberries as well. You don't have to use fresh. depending on what season you're making this. And I'm just using my hand to catch any pips. And I'm going to put my sugar in. And just the sharpness of the lemon, the sweetness of the sugar just works so well, especially with the chocolate. I think chocolate and raspberries go hand in hand. So I'm going to turn up my heat and put in the sugar. Now, if you're using a caster sugar, you definitely want to keep heating it until the grains melt. And it just smells really good. And what I'm doing, I'm pressing down my raspberries as well to kind of help them break down. And you can pass it through a thin sieve to get rid of any pips if you want to as well at the end. Another thing you can do if you don't want a smooth raspberry sauce is to actually have it like with the lumps of raspberries in there as well. That's absolutely fine. But today we're going to have like more of a smooth sauce that we can drizzle over. Okay, so they're broken down. And all I'm going to do is pass this through a sieve. And if I need to add some corn flour to thicken it, I will do. So carefully pour that in because obviously it's quite hot. And we'll keep our pan here for the moment. And then you just use your spoon to stir it round and it just gets rid of those pips. Okay, so that's perfect. So I'm just going to get rid of a few of these. If you don't want to make this one, that's obviously fine. But it's a really lovely, as I said, it's a really lovely sauce. It goes perfectly with your chocolate tart. And it's worth the effort. So pass that through. Getting all that lovely raspberry juice. Pour that back in. Hob back on. And we're just going to really quickly add in a little bit of corn flour to thicken, not much at all. And if it gets any small lumps, you can always pass it again, but I'm just going to kind of press them down with my spoon. And it's a sharp sauce. Turn up my heat. Now, I love raspberries and I love a raspberry sauce or raspberry coulis, but if you don't have to add this to this particular dish at all. But once you know how to make this, you can add it to ice cream, you can make it as a lovely sauce to accompany different types of desserts. So it's worth trying at least once, just so you've got it in your armory. So that's thickening right up, which is exactly what we want. And we've got a lovely raspberry coulis. And as it cools, it will also thicken as well. It's about the right thickness that will get a little bit thicker once it's cooled. I'm going to pour that into my bowl. And we can let that cool down and plate up once everything's ready. The chocolate and hazelnut tart is chilled, so now I'm going to slice it and serve it. In we go. Oh, and it's looking good. Nice big slice. Quite careful. Oh, that looks good. Over we go. And then I'm going to add in the raspberry coulis. So it's thickened. You can see it's thickened to what it was before, which is exactly what we want it. So give it a little stir when it's coming out of the fridge. And we can do a little drop and drag, but you can decorate it however you like. And that is your chocolate and hazelnut tart.